A young black girl walks into a prestigious bank with a $5,000 scholarship check, something she earned with pure hard work and determination. But instead of support, she's met with suspicion, whispers, and outright disrespect from the staff. They think she doesn't belong there. What they don't know, her mother owns the bank. And what happens when the truth comes out will leave everyone stunned. Stick around, you won't believe how this ends. It was one of those mornings where the sun hung high, but the chill in the air hadn't quite given in to its warmth. Jasmine Porter, only 14, felt the kind of excitement that fluttered deep in her chest and tingled at her fingertips. Her steps were slow and purposeful as she walked down the clean sidewalk toward Oakdee Bank, the city's most respected and imposing financial institution. She wore her school uniform like armor, a navy blue blazer with the school crest stitched proudly on the left breast, a pleated grey skirt, crisp white blouse, and polished black loafers that clicked confidently on the pavement. In her arms, she clutched a navy folder. Inside it, the check that symbolized more than just $5,000. It was proof of her academic prowess, her countless sleepless nights, her weekends spent studying instead of going out, her essays, her exams, and the respect she had quietly earned. The scholarship she had won to Wester Academy had not come easily, and this deposit, her very first bank transaction without her parents, was a rite of passage. Jasmine had insisted on doing it alone. She wanted to feel responsible, like someone who could handle things for herself. The tall, gleaming glass doors of the bank opened automatically as she stepped inside, the scent of polished wood and paper wafting around her. The lobby was large and brightly lit, filled with murmurs of polite conversations and the soft tapping of keys behind marble counters. Jasmine took a slow breath, calming her nerves, and joined the line. A few moments later, she found herself at the counter, facing a young teller named Tom. His eyes flicked up briefly, then returned to the check she held out. As he read the amount, his expression shifted slightly, barely perceptible, but Jasmine noticed. The check was held up to the light, turned side to side, examined as if it might disappear under scrutiny. Before Jasmine could explain, Tom gestured subtly toward the manager's office. Victoria Hayes, the branch manager, stood behind the frosted glass. In her late 40s and dressed in a steel grey pantsuit, she had the kind of presence that silenced a room. Her posture was immaculate, her movements sharp and intentional, her features lined with judgment. The moment her eyes landed on Jasmine, her expression changed. She strode toward the counter with her chin slightly lifted, her lips tight. "A $5,000 check?" she asked loudly, just enough to draw attention from the customers in line behind Jasmine. "For a student your age? Where did this come from?" Jasmine blinked, a little startled, but answered clearly, "It's from my school, an academic scholarship. I have my documents right here." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder and handed over her school ID and the award letter. Victoria didn't even glance at the ID. She took the check and looked it over with a scrutinizing eye, her face unreadable, but her body language full of unspoken contempt. "We've had a lot of fraudulent checks lately," she muttered, not to Jasmine, but to Tom. "We'll need to verify this." And just like that, Jasmine's world stopped. She had envisioned walking in, handing the check over, receiving a deposit slip, and leaving with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Instead, she was now the center of unwelcome attention. A woman in line behind her shifted uncomfortably. A man near the waiting area lowered his newspaper slightly. Whispers, subtle and slicing, moved through the room. Jasmine's hands clutched the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "Can I call my mum?" she asked. "She's expecting me home. I don't have my phone with me." Victoria waved her hand without looking back. "That's not our problem," she said dismissively. "You'll wait until we finish our verification process." And with that, she walked away, leaving Jasmine alone at the counter. Jasmine stepped aside, her eyes searching for a place to sit, to hide, to disappear. But the only seat available was in the middle of the room. She stood there instead, her head bowed slightly, but her jaw tight. Her father had always taught her to never let them see you cry. She held on to that advice now, like a lifeline. Around her, the bank moved on. Customers went about their business. Tellers smiled at those next in line. But for Jasmine, time had slowed. Her check, Her documents and her dignity had been taken behind a desk where they were being treated like contraband. Minutes passed. 10, 15, 20. She felt every second press down on her like a weight. She heard murmurs, the click of heels on marble, the rustle of paperwork, all normal sounds that now felt like part of a hostile world. From the far corner, Victoria stood with arms folded across her chest, speaking to Tom in hushed tones, but not so hushed that Jasmine couldn't make out some of the words. "We need to maintain our standards," Victoria was saying. "Can't just let anyone walk in and expect to be treated like they belong." Jasmine flinched. That last word, belong, hung in the air like a curse. She suddenly understood everything. This wasn't about the check. This wasn't about verification. This was about how she looked, young, black, alone. She remembered every lesson her mother had taught her about composure, strength, and how the world may not always treat her fairly. But this wasn't a lesson anymore. This was real. Her fists clenched at her sides. Her breath slowed. Her mind, though anxious, stayed sharp. She watched how others were being treated. Older white customers came in, handed over their checks, smiled, and walked away within minutes. None of them were inspected. None of them were questioned. None of them stood alone in the middle of the room like suspects. Jasmine wanted to speak up, to demand fairness, to say she was worthy of respect, but she didn't. Not yet. Because she had also learned another lesson from her mother. Sometimes silence is power, because eventually the truth reveals itself. And when it does, no one can deny it. And in that moment, Jasmine knew this wasn't the end of her visit. This was only the beginning. The bank lobby had become a fishbowl, and Jasmine Porter stood at its centre, feeling the invisible current of judgment swirl around her. The once routine atmosphere of clicking heels, quiet conversations, and shuffling paperwork was now disrupted by the crackling tension that pulsed around her presence. The overhead lights hummed above, but everything felt dimmer, colder. She tightened her grip on her folder of documents, the award letter, her school ID, even her academic transcript, just in case. None of it seemed to matter. Her body stood tall, her chin slightly raised, as if refusing to let the heaviness in her chest collapse her completely. She watched Victoria Hayes out of the corner of her eye, the sharp lines of the woman's suit, the forced perfection in her posture, the sour twist of her lips that looked more like ownership than authority. Victoria wasn't running a bank. She was guarding it, as if Jasmine's presence was some kind of breach. "We've had a lot of fraud lately," Victoria had said, her voice heavy with implication. "We'll need to verify everything before proceeding." The words might have sounded standard, but the tone was surgical, meant to cut, not comfort. Jasmine didn't argue. She had always believed that respect was a two-way street, and that if you led with grace, others would respond in kind. But here, her presence had triggered alarm instead of acknowledgement. The way Victoria didn't even bother to look her in the eyes, how Tom held the check up to the light, as though it might spontaneously confess its illegitimacy. It was humiliating. More than that, it was confusing. This wasn't some random check Jasmine had scribbled herself. It had the emblem of West Ridge Academy in the top corner, the signature of the board's financial officer, and a certified watermark visible under UV light. Jasmine had done everything right. She had brought every piece of documentation a rational adult could ask for, even included a signed congratulations letter from the school principal. Still, none of that erased the skepticism on Victoria's face, or the way Tom's eyes darted between the paper and her like she was trying to run a scam. Jasmine tried again, softly this time. "Please, may I use the phone? My mum will be worried." But Victoria waved her off, cutting her mid-sentence with a tone meant to remind her of her place. "That's not our concern. You'll sit tight." The instruction wasn't just cold, it was commanding, as if Jasmine wasn't a customer, but a disruption. She looked around, searching for a friendly face, but even those who didn't seem openly hostile avoided eye contact. That was how complicity worked, she thought. Silence masquerading as neutrality. A woman with a designer purse whispered something to the man beside her, nodding in Jasmine's direction. An elderly man standing by the loan counter furrowed his brow in disapproval, as if just her being there with a $5,000 check was a sign of something suspicious. Time dragged forward like wet cement. Jasmine stood, breathing slowly, focusing on her heartbeat, her father's words playing over and over in her mind. When you feel unseen, remember who raised you. You were built to be unshakable. The silence was suffocating. Not just the lack of words, but the emotional quiet, the way no one spoke up, the way even the walls seemed to absorb her presence like a blot. She imagined herself becoming invisible, just a shadow on the marble floor. But then, from behind the counter, Victoria's voice cracked again, loud enough to fill the space. We can't just hand out money to every kid who walks in with a piece of paper. That's not how a bank works. The words weren't directed at Jasmine, but they were meant for her. Her mouth went dry, but she said nothing. She wouldn't break here, not in front of this woman, not in front of all these strangers who knew nothing about her, because Jasmine knew who she was. She was the top student at Westridge, a girl who had won awards in mathematics, who had taught herself advanced calculus, who had worked summer jobs to cover her school supplies when she could have easily asked her parents. She had earned this moment, and now it was being twisted into a punishment, all because someone in a blazer thought she didn't fit the image of someone deserving. Her knees ached from standing, but she refused to sit. It felt like if she sat, she'd be surrendering. Victoria stood near Tom, whispering again, but Jasmine heard the words this time, clear and brutal. It doesn't matter what paperwork she brought. I've seen this kind of thing before. She's probably coached. They're getting good at forging. They. The word echoed in Jasmine's chest like a depth charge. They. Not people. Not kids. Not students. They. The coded language of prejudice disguised as protocol. She inhaled sharply. Her eyes stung, but she didn't blink. Not yet. Not here. The urge to scream swelled inside her, like steam building in a sealed kettle. But instead of letting it burst, she tightened her jaw, reached into her folder, and took out the copy of her principal's letter again. She walked forward and laid it gently on the counter between her and Victoria. Here, she said, her voice steady. This is signed by Principal Hargrove. You can call the school right now. Her voice didn't quiver. Victoria glanced at it, unmoved. We'll get to it when we can, she said, not bothering to pick it up. In the meantime, you'll wait. Tom returned to his computer, pretending to type. It was all theatre, Jasmine realised. A slow performance designed to discourage, to delay, to let the embarrassment do its job. But if this was a test, she would pass it. She'd wait. She'd stand. She wouldn't let the weight of their assumptions bend her spine. The sterile silence of Oakdee Bank was abruptly shattered by the sharp, authoritative click of heels on marble, a rhythmic staccato that seemed to slice through the tension hanging in the air. Heads turned instinctively, the collective gaze of staff and customers drawn toward the glass entrance doors as they swung open. In walked a woman who carried presents like armour, Dr. Naomi Porter. Her entrance was not loud or theatrical, yet the room reacted as if gravity itself had shifted. Dressed in a sleek charcoal grey power suit and modest pearl earrings, her natural curls pinned in a low bun that revealed both elegance and discipline, Naomi did not look like someone to be trifled with. She didn't have to say a word to command the space. Her gaze scanned the lobby with the efficiency of someone trained to assess the temperature of a room in seconds. And the moment her eyes landed on Jasmine, her daughter standing alone in the middle of the lobby, arms crossed protectively over a folder, face stoic but betrayed by a flicker of emotional fatigue, Naomi's entire posture shifted. She moved faster now, crossing the floor with purpose. Victoria Hayes, still preoccupied whispering to Tom, didn't even notice the incoming storm until Naomi's voice, measured, calm, but laced with fire, cut through the stale air like a blade. "Why is my daughter standing alone in the middle of your lobby, looking like she's being interrogated?" Time froze. Tom's fingers hovered awkwardly over his keyboard. Victoria turned, blinking in surprise, then confusion. "Excuse me," she said, trying to recover the dominance she'd held moments ago. "And you are?" Naomi took 2 slow steps forward, lowering her bag to the edge of the counter with deliberate grace, as if even her accessories were trained in professionalism. "I'm Dr. Naomi Porter," she said evenly, her voice tightening like a coiled spring. "CEO of Porter and Gold, the financial firm that underwrites 1/3 of your commercial loan portfolios. My daughter, Jasmine Porter, came in to deposit a scholarship check. Earned, not gifted. She did everything right, and you've been treating her like a criminal. So let me ask again, why is my daughter still standing here, check unprocessed, her documents untouched, and her dignity shattered in front of your clients?" The lobby reacted with a series of soft gasps and whispered exchanges. The power dynamic had shifted so quickly that Victoria's mouth moved, but no words came. She glanced at Tom, but he'd already lowered his eyes to his desk. Naomi didn't wait for an answer. She turned toward Jasmine, brushing a gentle hand against her arm. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice softening for the first time. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes shimmered with tears she had fought hard to hold back. "They wouldn't even let me call you," she said quietly. Naomi's jaw clenched. "Of course they didn't," she muttered, more to herself than to Jasmine. Then, louder, "I need the branch manager, now." Victoria's composure fractured visibly. I'm the manager," she stammered, attempting to straighten her posture and reassert control, but the facade was crumbling. Naomi blinked at her once. "Then you can explain to me, as manager, what procedural justification you had for denying a minor access to a phone, delaying a valid deposit, and allowing your staff to imply fraud without cause." Her tone was surgical, each word sliced. "Was it the check's amount that confused you, the absence of her parents, or was it simply the colour of her skin?" Victoria's face flushed. "Ma'am, that's a serious accusation." "No," Naomi interrupted, still calm but now lethal. "What's serious is that you made a child feel like a trespasser in an institution that thrives off people like me, off our investments, off our trust. And you've not only jeopardized that, you've insulted it." The lobby had transformed. Where there had once been murmurs of doubt, now there was a new energy, one of clarity. Several customers nodded, silently affirming what they had just witnessed. Naomi turned to Tom, who couldn't meet her gaze. "Return my daughter's documents, now. I'll handle the deposit myself." Tom fumbled with the folder, sliding it across the counter without a word. Naomi flipped through the pages briskly, double-checked the check, and pulled out her phone, dialing the direct number of the bank's regional vice president. "You'll want to explain this situation before I do," she said to Victoria, who was now trembling visibly. "Because once I hit send on this email, it won't be just your job on the line. It'll be this entire branch's public reputation." The seconds ticked by, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. This was about accountability, about the insidious way professionalism had been weaponized to mask bias. About how, even in spaces where success was earned fairly, the gatekeepers still chose to see shadows instead of light when the person standing before them didn't look like their version of belonging. Naomi turned back to her daughter. "Let's go," she said. "We'll deposit this at headquarters, somewhere you're treated like a human being." But as they walked toward the exit, a soft voice called out from the side of the room. It was the older man who had been waiting by the loan desk earlier. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said to Naomi. "I didn't say anything earlier, but I saw it too. And I'm sorry. She didn't deserve that." Jasmine looked up, surprised. then offered a small appreciative nod. One by one, a few others murmured agreements. It wasn't enough to undo the harm, but it was something, a shift. As the heavy glass doors opened once more, and the mother and daughter stepped out into the bright daylight, Jasmine exhaled fully for the first time in what felt like hours. "You were amazing in there," she whispered to Naomi. Her mother looked at her, and for the first time since entering the bank, smiled. "No, baby," she said, "you were. You didn't back down. That's strength they can't measure in bank accounts." And with that, they walked forward, not just away from a bank, but towards something far more powerful, the undeniable truth of who they were and who they refused to let the world reduce them to. The silence that lingered in the aftermath of Naomi Porter's confrontation was far louder than anything Victoria Hayes could have said. As Naomi ushered Jasmine to a quiet bench just outside the bank's entrance, the cool wind brushing against their cheeks seemed to clear the stale air of that building. Jasmine sat down slowly, her small hands still gripping her folder of documents like a shield, the imprint of humiliation not yet fully faded from her expression. Naomi gently tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice low but warm, like embers under ash. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes, usually bright with curiosity and confidence, were dull with silent hurt. Naomi's gaze lingered, softening briefly, but only briefly, because inside her something had cracked wide open. The fury hadn't passed, it had evolved. What had just happened wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time offense. It was a glimpse into a deeply broken system that her daughter had just been baptized into. Naomi had spent her entire life fighting for a seat at tables that were never designed for her, and she had done so with composure, dignity, and intelligence. But this, watching her child get dehumanized in a place she herself indirectly funded, felt like a betrayal at the deepest level. She wasn't just going to walk away with a momentary victory. She was going to burn the old scaffolding down and rebuild the whole damn house. As Jasmine rested beside her, Naomi was already typing on her phone, her fingers flying with the precision of a surgeon. Within minutes, she was on a secure video call with 3 board members of Oak D Bank, including its chief compliance officer and the head of customer operations. They weren't expecting to see her face on a Saturday, especially not in a call labeled urgent client incident. But the moment they joined and recognized Naomi's name, they straightened in their chairs. Naomi didn't yell. She didn't have to. She presented every detail of the incident with ruthless precision. Times, faces, tone of voice, and even snippets of overheard conversations. She referenced past contributions her firm had made, not as threats, but as context. "You trusted my name when you needed investor confidence. Now, I want to see if you can earn that trust back," she said. And the board members listened. Not because they were afraid of a lawsuit, though the possibility loomed, but because Naomi's authority came from a place even deeper, moral integrity. Within 48 hours, Victoria Hayes was placed on administrative leave pending formal investigation. Her history of customer complaints, previously swept under polite HR reports, was reopened. Tom, the teller, was not fired, but reassigned and scheduled for a series of intensive diversity, sensitivity, and youth engagement trainings. Naomi was insistent. "I don't want heads to roll. I want change. Lasting change." She also proposed, and had accepted, a full review of Oak D Bank's customer service protocols across all regional branches. A new initiative was drafted, reviewed, and greenlit within weeks. It was called the Porter Standard, named not by Naomi's request, but by the board's unanimous vote. It required that every customer-facing employee go through quarterly empathy training, scenario-based equity workshops, and biannual youth engagement sessions, particularly focused on underrepresented communities. A section of this training included testimonial case studies, Jasmine's story, anonymized but no less powerful. Naomi had turned a personal wound into institutional reform. But the consequences didn't stop at the administrative level. The media caught wind of the incident, not from Naomi, but from a bank employee who had overheard everything and submitted an anonymous tip to a local journalist. When the story hit online, it exploded within hours. CEO's daughter humiliated in bank over scholarship check became a trending headline, followed by op-eds, public debates, and viral reactions. News outlets reached out to Naomi, but she declined interviews, issuing only a single powerful statement. Bias doesn't always wear a hood or scream in anger. Sometimes it wears a name tag and whispers doubt across a counter. It's time we trained our institutions to do better. The ripple effect was immediate. Other banks launched internal reviews. Youth advocacy groups reached out to Naomi for partnerships. Jasmine, meanwhile, finally got to make her deposit, this time at Oakbank's downtown headquarters, where she was welcomed not just by the staff, but by the regional VP herself, who stood at the door to greet her. Jasmine walked in with her head held high, her mother by her side. And when she handed over her scholarship check this time, it was accepted with reverence, not suspicion. She didn't smile much during the process. She hadn't yet learned to trust again. But when the teller handed her the deposit slip and quietly said, "Thank you for being brave," something in her shifted. That night at home, Jasmine sat at her desk, still in uniform, typing furiously. She wasn't doing homework. She was writing her first blog post. It was titled, "The Day I Realized My Name Wasn't Enough." In it, she recounted everything, not just what happened, but how it made her feel, the sting of being watched, the ache of being doubted, the moment her voice cracked from fear, and the way her mother's presence turned a storm into sunrise. The post was raw, honest, and unfiltered. When she published it, she didn't expect anyone to read it beyond her school friends, but within 3 days, it had 700,000 views. Letters poured in. Teachers, parents, students, all sharing stories that echoed hers. Jasmine had unknowingly become the voice of something bigger. And as she sat in her room, staring at her laptop, a notification popped up. "We'd love to invite you to speak at our Youth Equity Conference." It was from the National Council for Educational Justice. Jasmine looked up, surprised, unsure. She called down the hall, "Mom?" Naomi appeared in the doorway. "What's up?" Jasmine hesitated. "Do you think I'm ready to talk about it? In public?" Naomi smiled, stepping into the room, placing a hand gently on Jasmine's shoulder. "Sweetheart, you lived it. That makes you more than ready. That makes you unstoppable." The days following the firestorm of attention brought a strange kind of clarity to Jasmine Porter's life, one born not out of fame, but out of alignment with something deeper than recognition. After her story became national news, she expected a flurry of questions from her classmates, curiosity from teachers, and whispers in the hallways of Westridge Academy. What she didn't expect was the quiet respect that followed her steps. No one asked for selfies. No one treated her like a celebrity. Instead, friends offered warm smiles and teachers gave nods of understanding, as if acknowledging her unspoken resilience. Jasmine had always excelled in her studies, but now she found herself more focused than ever, not just on academics, but on voice, on purpose. In her English class, when asked to write a persuasive essay, she submitted a piece titled "Silence is Not Civility: How Quiet Discrimination Shapes Youth Identity." When her civics teacher held a debate about systemic inequality, Jasmine didn't just participate. She led the argument with poise and power, citing not only statistics but her lived experience. Westridge had always prided itself on academic excellence, but Jasmine began to sense a quiet shift. A few students began speaking up more about instances of subtle racism on campus. The administration scheduled its first ever open forum on student identity and bias. Jasmine was invited to speak, not because she was a token, but because they understood the integrity she brought. And while it still made her uncomfortable to stand at the center of attention, she started to see how standing there, even uncomfortably, could make space for others to rise too. Meanwhile, Naomi continued to channel the momentum of the incident into a wider initiative. She launched the Porter Foundation, a non-profit aimed at empowering young students, particularly girls of color, to navigate financial systems with confidence. The foundation didn't just offer scholarships, it offered hands-on workshops, mentorship programs, mock bank visits, and leadership retreats. Naomi believed that power came from both education and exposure, and she made it her mission to provide both. Jasmine became the honorary youth ambassador of the foundation, not in name only, but in heart. She attended events, mentored younger students, and helped design programs that made financial literacy engaging and accessible. But she didn't stop there. The viral blog post she wrote was just the beginning. Jasmine launched an online journal called Young Voices Accounted, where students from all over the country shared stories of discrimination, resilience, achievement, and hope. Submissions came from cities, small towns, international schools, even juvenile centres. She moderated the stories herself, personally reading each submission with care. Her writing, raw and compassionate, became a voice for others who had never felt heard. One evening, months after the bank incident, Jasmine sat quietly in the same bank's newly renovated youth branch, a space inspired by her experience, where young clients could learn about finances in a safe, welcoming environment. She was helping a 12-year-old girl deposit her first allowance into a savings account. The girl looked up at her and asked, "Have you always known what to say when adults don't believe you?" Jasmine paused, smiled softly, and replied, "No. But I always knew who I was, even when they didn't." That moment sealed it. She understood that her story was no longer just hers. It was a mirror for others, a torch passed forward, and a reminder that respect isn't always given. It's often built from the inside out. And now, every time she walked into a room, or into a bank, or stood in front of a crowd, people didn't just know who Jasmine Porter was, they understood what she stood for. Courage, dignity, and the unshakable belief that the next generation deserves better, and will fight, fiercely but gracefully, to ensure it. Jasmine Porter didn't walk out of that bank in silence. She walked out with dignity, and the world took notice, because at moments like this, they reveal more than bias. They reveal the strength of those who rise above it. When power is misused, truth becomes louder, and when a young girl refuses to shrink herself, she becomes a mirror for us all. Now it's your turn. Speak up, share your story, tag someone who needs to hear this. Because one voice can challenge a policy, but many voices, they can change the world. Like, share. Comment your thoughts below. Let's make sure stories like Jasmine's aren't ignored, they're remembered, and they lead to change.